Let's continue talking about the 6 modes of the documentary. So we know documentaries vary in their look, and there's different types out there, and we've touched upon that there's sort of these subgenres called modes. Bill Nichols kind of came up with this. So there's the poetic, the expository, the observational, which we saw in Grey Gardens, participatory, reflexive, and performative. And again, we've kind of touched on this. There's been some gaps in it, so I just kind of want to go back a little bit on some and then expound on some others. So the whole point of it is just to kind of create this lexicon for talking about documentaries and seeing them in a different light. And of course, there's sort of overlap with a lot of these genres as well. Not genres, but they kind of sometimes you can see elements of multiple modes in different documentaries.
How has documentary filmmaking evolved? You look at something like Grey Gardens, which was beautiful in its own right, but then you see something like Searching for Sugar Man, and it seems like filmmaking nowadays is so much faster. The editing is just quicker. How have we changed as an audience so that filmmaking is what it is in terms of this fast cutting?
Well, it reflects the same kind of attention span that all forms of filmmaking, commercial making, television, all of that has become faster. So Grey Gardens is going to look slow. So yes, everything is faster. If you look at Grey Gardens, it is of a different era, and it's also cinema verite, which is supposedly like a fly on the wall style of filmmaking. Some would argue that you're never a fly on the wall. The minute you have a cameraman in a room, you're influencing the events. But we talk about different styles of documentaries in the class, and cinema verite is certainly one of the earlier forms of documentary filmmaking where you're just observing an event. Searching for Sugar Man is something much more constructed, or you're adding visual and oral textures to it. You're using music in a very dramatic way. You're using sound effects in a very dramatic way. Graphics, animation. Errol Morris does the same thing with his montages. You're actually constructing scenarios to support your story that are completely created by the filmmaker. There's several sequences in The Fog of War. Errol Morris takes what normally would have been just a picture of a B-29 over Tokyo, but because he likes to construct his documentaries, he'll cut the plane out, he'll make the props spin around, and he'll just do things that kind of take you to a different place, so you're observing it in a different way. It's more of an entertainment style, but it's also more of you're kind of looking at it in a different way than perhaps a documentary you would see on BBC about World War II. So there are different styles. Cutting is faster today, no doubt about it, and the other documentaries we talk about, so there was the cinema verite, which is observational. Then there's something that might be called participatory, which is the kind of filmmaking that Michael Moore does, or Morgan Spurlock, where the filmmaker doesn't pretend that he's a fly on the wall. In fact, it's the exact opposite. They become part of the action. They're a character in their own movie. And then there's the more routine or documentary we see on television is like Frontline. And that's kind of an expository style where you have the voice of God narrator taking you down the path. Ken Burns does that as well. So we look at the different styles of documentaries, and we also look in every one of those forms, things are faster, things do move quicker. And yet sometimes you can play against that and slow it down to effect. So there's always a context for the way you're shooting and cutting a documentary.
Okay. And all of a sudden that director's name escapes me, and I can't find it without closing this down. But anyway, so that expository, we're going to talk more on that one later, but that's, again, that specific topic, kind of almost like an essay style, so that BBC voice of God, narrator talking kind of thing. And they rely heavily on fact, presenting everything like fact. Whereas the performative, those are built on subjectivity. a filmmaker is usually passionate about proving a point and immerses into a particular world of a subject. And I think the example that I gave before was Icarus, where the director actually was taking steroids, and he was an amateur pro-am cyclist, so not quite professional, but not above an amateur, and was competing and was trying to show if he could cheat, if he could subvert the testing. Right, so that's very involved, very kind of performing in it. Morgan Spurlock, the Super Size Me Again. That's a very big one. They're not always about proving, they're a little bit about perspective. What it is to be like blank, or what it is to be in this world. Louis Theroux does that as well, where he goes and lives, with, or is just very immersed in whatever his topic is. So, observational, very objective way of documenting that cinema verite, that fly on the wall. The filmmaker tries to remove themselves as much as possible, not engaging with the subject as much as possible. And again, you'll hear that sometimes as direct cinema, cinema verite. So this would be Grey Gardens. Yeah, we do occasionally see them. Same with in American Movie, right? We know the filmmakers are there, but they don't seem to be influencing it a whole lot. Kind of the King of Kong a little bit as well. Sometimes you hear the directors kind of interacting or talking, so there's degrees to everything. But with the observational, it kind of became more popular as in the 60s and 70s when there were advancements in technology and cameras. 16 millimeter became more available, lighter. Syncing sound equipment became easier to get, and just those new advancements in things like lenses allowed for being able to film in lower light, with faster film in there, and just able to be more effective in shooting. So those lighter cameras gave you good handheld shots. That gives that feeling of being there, getting closer to the action, and then longer takes as well with it. So the less we're cutting, the more we kind of get ourselves immersed in there. But it limits on things like reenactments, voiceover, and then it is a slower pacing. And we're just not used to that. Like if you compare Grey Gardens to The Social Dilemma, I would wager, there's so many people would probably fall asleep during Grey Gardens now. Like they just don't have that attention span. We need cuts, we need things, action, we need loud to keep people focused because, social media is just kind of, weaken the attention span of most. So we have observational. So whereas the poetic mode is an avant-garde and the expository mode is didactic, that kind of argumentative, the observational mode kind of lives in the middle of the ground, telling concrete stories about real people, but eschewing moralizing narratives. That was a good kind of quote I found on it that just kind of showed where they are at different levels. So that observational, again, kind of right in the middle of both of those, like it not being quite non-narrative with the poetic, like we'll see this week when we start kind of delving into it. And then the participatory, of course, is the exact opposite. So the observatory, right, observational, that is more about just collecting the information, fly on the wall. Participatory is the filmmakers kind of structuring the story with their involvement in it, with the way that it's edited, kind of putting those formal elements of filmmaking to bring kind of meaning, right? It also gives it a chance for the filmmaker to kind of live in that world a little bit. So a little bit performative, but more about being there immersed in the world, right? And observe, kind of becoming a first-person observer, asking the questions that we would want asked. So this is that Michael Moore kind of style. It's a similar shooting style. You can have that filmmaker speak on or off camera, and we tend to align with the filmmaker's view. I think that's kind of part of it. Is we the audience live vicariously through their experience participating in this documentary. So there can be a vast difference between Errol Morris, if you watch The Fog of War, who is clearly there, who's clearly questioning, but also removed. Like we don't actually ever see the involvement, but also then in the way the film is constructed as well. Trying to, it's almost like as the filmmaker is gathering this information, they're visualizing it for the audience in such a way to kind of stir their emotions. So they're creating things to get you engaged so that you'll kind of come at it more from an emotional place and less of a logical place. But vast difference between like a Michael Moore and an Errol Morris type film. So the poetic documentary, they rely on the visual rather than the story to create meaning for the film. So Bill Nichols had this quote, that poetic mode moves away from the objective reality of a given situation or people to grasp at an inner truth that can only be grasped by poetical manipulation. So it's kind of like a good example is think of how we read poetry versus how we read a novel. There's a hidden truth to a poem that goes kind of beyond the words, and that almost subtextual. The way the words are used together creates all new and different meanings, whereas a story spells it out for you. So these films are, again, on that lack of structure, which is kind of opposite of one like King of Kong. They evoke a mood. You might hear this sometimes as avant-garde, experimental, can kind of go by different names, and even within that, there's kind of subgenres upon subgenres. So they like to really play with things like time and space can be affected in a more direct way. We're kind of allowing license to the filmmaker to take us on more of an emotional journey. Tone and expressiveness of shots are emphasized, the texture of shots, and the use of line and shape. Samsara is one that you are going to watch part of, and we've seen part of the trailer. But just to give you an idea, it's kind of dealing with a Buddhist idea of the beginning, and it's like a repeated cycle of something, like birth to death again, and everything kind of. So it's kind of it goes beyond what I know in philosophically, but you kind of get the sense of just this immersiveness and this growth and decay, and a look at modern civilization from, I think this was like 2011, across the world. So it's a beautiful movie. Each person kind of takes a little bit of their own element away from it, but I'll be curious what you think. They rely heavily on this idea of the Soviet montage way of editing. So we're used to the classical Hollywood design, which is that invisible editing where you're not necessarily noticing the edit as much. And the Soviet montage or Soviet editing style is truth that comes from a dialectic approach to films. So if we're looking at shots, this plus this equals this. So this image plus this image, therein lies the idea. And then this image plus this image equals this. And they build upon each other. So if we had a shot of me and then a shot of the students, we would get the idea of class, right? So instead of saying we are in a class, it kind of constructs these ideas together. So the Soviet montage theory developed out of the communist revolution, and it's kind of built upon the foundation of communism, of being geared towards film for the worker. It was a government-run industry. Primarily at the start was used, the films like Battleship Potemkin, October, were kind of a way to, was it Lenin who said, like, TV shapes the thought of all, or film. Some I think it was Lenin. Anyway, they knew the power of film, and used it for a lot of the kind of lower class who didn't know how to read. They felt film would be a great way to win them over. And then Eisenstein really Sergei Eisenstein really developed these ideas for editing. Editing was kind of the be all end all for the movie industry there. Everything was kind of placed on that didactic approach. And just that whole power of the cut. And it really is this idea of a thesis plus antithesis equals synthesis. Conflict between shots creates an art. So there were 5 areas that he talks about, and they are so heady that I just want to touch upon them so you're aware of them. So there's like a metric cutting, which is based on the length of the shot. It creates kind of a tempo to quicken or slow a scene. Rhythmic, cutting on action within a scene, such as marching. And it's more concerned with what's in the frame. Tonal, the shape in a shot. Light or dark, the overall framing. And how will it juxtapose with the next shot. And then the overtonal is the culmination of metric, rhythmic, and tonal as played out in a sequence, and then how it juxtaposes the other sequence. Very complex. I think the editing time took quite a while. So where the previous 4 types were used to create an emotional or visceral response, the last is intellectual montage, and it tries to create, this one you might be a little bit more familiar with. It tries to create an abstract idea through the constructions of shots. So for instance, we see in one segment there's a lion sleeping, the lion wakes up, the lion stands up and is on guard, and it kind of then goes with the waking up of the revolution. It cuts to then you see the proletariat, and so it's building on an intellectual idea of something. Here is the trailer to October. Actually, it's the full film. You're free to watch it. I would recommend, if you do, it's very hard to follow, like very hard to follow. I don't think it's one that if you just picked up from somewhere around in the 22nd, Trotsky comes in. There's a famous staircase sequence. Time here, 22:18. Or Kerensky, I said Trotsky. I got my 2 very different people, but you will kind of start to see what's in there. Probably the 2 hardest films I've ever had to watch in my life. I think this was one of them, and I can't even think of the other. Maybe that's a good thing. I can see it, but I can't think of the title. Probably if I do, it'll get stuck in my head. Hey, for an extra credit point, and to show you actually watch the lecture, when you go to turn in your assignment on the viewings, write in here, write somewhere on there, Professor Foss, did you figure out what that other film was? And I'll award you 2 extra credit points for that assignment. Just somewhere on there, could be a bottom, top, wherever, just so I can see it. And I'll remember what that was. It's just been a long time since I've even had to think of it. So anyway, you can watch it if you want. Okay. So this is a little bit easier concept to understand, is the Kuleshov effect, and that was kind of built out of that same school that Eisenstein was working at, and this was developed or realized by Lev Kuleshov. Really, that eyeline matches showed emotion can be created through manipulation. So one reaction shot plus a POV creates emotion in audience. So let me show you what I mean. So who better to explain it than Hitchcock?
Now, the third way is what one might call pure cinematics, the assembly of film, and how it can be changed to create a different idea. Now, we have a close-up. Let me show what he sees. Let's assume he saw a woman holding a baby in her arms. Now we cut back to his reaction to what he sees, and he smiles. Now, what is he as a character? He's a kindly man. He's sympathetic. Now, let's take the middle piece of film away, the woman with the child, but leave his two pieces of film as they were. Now we'll put in a piece of film of a girl in a bikini. He looks, girl in a bikini, he smiles. What is he now? The dirty old man. He's no longer the benign gentleman who loves babies. That's the difference. That's what film can do for you.
Or you for it, as it were.
So kind of an interesting thing, isn't it, that the exact two same shots, if you replace, so you got the character, their POV, then a reaction, and you change the POV and it changes how you, the audience, see it. It's really interesting. Okay, so those again kind of go in the Kuleshov effect, not so much part of the Soviet montage that's necessary for poetic film, but kind of a cool thing to consider as filmmakers. So a little bit extra added in there for you. All right, the reflexive mode is concerned with the showing, the process of filmmaking, connecting the viewer with the world of the filmmaker. It deconstructs the traditional hidden style of Hollywood and connect the audience with the view of the filmmaker. So reflexive in and of itself kind of means directed or turned back on itself, overtly and usually ironically reflecting conventions of a genre from a reflexive novel or marked by capable of reflection. Okay, so kind of what it sounds like. So Nichols says about this, it calls attention to the conventions of documentary filmmaking and sometimes the methodologies such as field work or an interview. And then the film that you're going to watch, Man with a Movie Camera, Dziga Verdov, I can't remember his real name because I actually think he was from America, but began making this film in Russia and is probably the premier example. But this is a quote, the manifesto to the American, and this is I can't remember what year, like 19 teens, early 20s maybe, to the American adventure film with its showy dynamism and to the dramatizations of the American Pinkertons. The Keenoaks, that was his groups, say thanks for the rapid shot changes and the close-ups. Good, but disorderly, not based on a precise study of movement. A cut above the psychological drama, but still lacking in foundation. A cliche, a copy of a copy. We proclaim the old films based on the romance, theatrical films. Keep away from them. Keep your eyes off them. They're mortally dangerous, contagious. We affirm the future of cinema art by denying its present. Cinematography must die so that the art of cinema may live. All right. Fun stuff there. So again, you'll see that process as you're watching. It's, in this case, the exact counter to the Hollywood film. But reflexive, like many things, is kind of got its extremes on its end. So this was kind of an interesting example as well.
I think the first time I picked up a paintbrush, I was 6 years old. I've always enjoyed expressing myself through art making and music. I'm not quite sure how to describe my style of art. I think it's quite diverse. I guess I enjoy tapping into my inner child when it comes to art making. My style of music and my style of art making are quite simplified, in a sense that it's very spacious, and I think for me less is more. With art, I generally work with ink, and so I guess you could say it's kind of stylized. I do a lot of illustration, so I think they both meet at a very simplified point. Whatever. I don't know if
Okay, so you can kind of see that there's an element of the making of the film going into it. That's almost a way that we see a lot now, almost as like behind the scenes of the interview or the interviewee getting mic'd up. So those elements of it's an interesting approach, because it's almost just kind of one of those cliched things now that you see, but it also sort of invites the audience in to remember that it is a documentary and that they're kind of buckling up for the ride, that they're getting into the film this way. So it becomes kind of a very interesting thing. So that is just touching on some of those modes. There's a couple more that we'll discuss, but this should help you with your Man with the Movie Camera viewing, your Fog of War, or Roger and Me, and your 30 minutes of Samsara. So you also have October here if you want to go back. Any of these links you can watch if for some reason the audio quality on them was really bad or something like that. They shouldn't be. But if you go to the PDF, all of these are clickable links that you can watch. So, all right, everybody, happy filmmaking.